So Henry Cavill decided to leave the Netflix Witcher for some reason, a mysterious reason indeed, that eludes us to this day. I will not forgive Netflix for what it made me go through. Why, Papa Netflix? Why? Why must you take everything I love and cherish and stamp all over it and present me with its distorted corpse? For me to keep watching, hanging on to the little crumbs of what I liked from the original source material, to add to the watch time of this show, and to fill your already gigantic pockets with more money. Oh, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I thought the Netflix Witcher was fine. Then respectfully, this video isn't for you. This video is for my poor, wounded brethren who were like me, jumping up and down in excitement when they heard that The Witcher would be adapted into a Netflix show, thinking it might become the next Game of Thrones, or at least the first 3 seasons of Game of Thrones. Just imagining impossibly great things for this show. Oh, how edgy and dark it will be. Oh, how people who would otherwise never have the patience to pay the 174 holy shit hours of gameplay will be able to experience this universe with its grimdark nature, unforgettable characters, and iconic scenes. But instead, what we got was...
What happened with you? You motherfucker goat. You're a dick.
Oh my
The balls.
God.
Balls I got from humans!
Wow. That was nice.
oh my god, they're curing her through the power of friendship.
Tell me you mean my magic.
Oh my God, bro.
Oh, how my heart hurts. How I grieve with the lost potential of what this show could have been. Once again in my life, I have to awkwardly stand there as my friends ask me, "You know about The Witcher, right? You played the games, you read the books. Well, what do you think about the Netflix show? What do you think about it?"
What do you think about it?
Only for me to twitch in place, trying to keep my mouth shut, because if I ever attempt to open it, I will never shut up. So everything I wanted to say about the Netflix Witcher, I've put it into this one video to vent my completely calm and neutral feelings and opinions about this topic. I think I deserve some protein milk for the emotional damage Netflix has given me. I want to start out with a more general critique about adaptations in general. Often nowadays, we see so many adaptations of already existing stories from books or even already existing movies and TV shows that literally no one asked for, but they just keep getting churned out because they're already insanely popular with their already existing fan bases. And this presents an interesting conundrum. When greedy corporate executives who have no idea about what makes the original source material resonate with a particular audience are placed in positions where they are responsible for adapting a certain story to appeal to the masses, what comes out as an end result is a derivative goo of a poorly written fanfiction of the source material. Something that on the surface resembles the original concepts, in rare moments even feels like the original story, but in reality has nothing to do with it. Yes, fanfiction is the word I am going with, because these adaptations on the surface look like the original source material, but at the end of the day, they seem to be missing a core element. A feeling or a spark that gives it this oomph that made us emotionally connect to the source material. And that spark is usually sacrificed and exchanged for cheap conflicts that gives the show this fast, action-packed pace and poorly executed lines that are supposed to resemble the concepts or themes presented in the original story. If you want to hear me yap more about adaptations and reboots in general, you can watch this video. But simply saying, "Oh, that spark I got in the beginning was missing," is a little vague. So I decided to do some research to come up with a full disaster report on where exactly the Netflix Witcher went wrong. And I was able to narrow down what went wrong with this show to 4 things. So let's get into analyzing this dumpster fire, shall we? I think the show's writers were either given an impossibly difficult task, or they purposefully chose to have an impossibly difficult task. Let me explain. The first episode of the Witcher series adapts The Lesser Evil, the third story from The Last Wish, the first book in the Witcher saga. That is why I was hopeful when I first started watching this show. In my head, this meant that the first season will be just like The Last Wish, where we would be following Geralt along a multitude of quests and adventures as we slowly understood his character as well as the world. And little by little, we would get introduced to new characters like Yennefer, Jaskier, and Ciri. Nope. The writers of the show went ahead and said, nah, it's too boring to have Geralt go on his little cute cottagecore quests. We need female rage, because kids nowadays love a strong female character. A completely fleshed out backstory for Yennefer, and also Ciri's point of view. Oh, by the way, all these POVs are happening centuries apart, but no doubt that the average viewer who doesn't actually know anything about this universe will be able to tell what's going on in this insanely convoluted and complex timeline. Right, guys? Right, guys? In this article published by Forbes, executive producer Tomek Baginski attributed some of the show's deviations to the need to simplify complex plot lines for broader audiences, citing challenges with unruly young viewers and stupid Americans. For a show that tries so hard to dumb things down for the average stupid American, in the writer's words, not my words, the show could not have been more convoluted and confusing. And it's not even in a cool Christopher Nolan-esque way where things are really confusing but they gradually reveal themselves so you get the full picture. No, it's just a cluster that confuses you and doesn't mean anything. Like, they wanted to have so many things. It was kind of like they were trying to bake a cake that has every flavor. So they threw in all these different ingredients, hoping that it would somehow work. Like, oh, we want this to be a lemon cake, but also a carrot cake, but also a velvet cake. But what comes out at the end is this vomit bomb, and you can't even enjoy the things that made those separate flavors nice and unique to begin with. I mean, if you're new to this channel, you should know by now that I love making food analogies. While the Netflix Witcher starts out pretty close to the source material, after a few episodes, it then suddenly jumps to the second book, Sword of Destiny. The short stories that weren't adapted from the first book led to huge missing gaps, from character arcs to conflicts seeming to appear out of nowhere within the show, eventually leading to an extremely rushed and disjointed timeline, where even the fans of the series, familiar with the universe, struggled to fill in the gaps. Because the first season was not just adapting a single short story every episode, they had to set up backstories for Yennefer and Ciri as well. But the way the point of views shifted and the sheer amount of stuff that was happening just from the first episode, it felt so overwhelming and underwhelming at the same time. On the surface, there is so much going on. It is so abrasively fast-paced and action-packed, but you also feel kind of bored. In the books and the games, while in concept similar or even exactly the same things happen, events don't happen in this big, rushed, overwhelming way. If there are major action sequences, it is often followed by character moments and emotional beats to make the audience understand why this is important and why we should care about it. Before going into this show, I was already someone who loved and lived for these characters. And yet, in the Netflix Witcher, I really did not care what was gonna happen to them, and that's saying something. There is no doubt that with any book to TV adaptation, some scenes, some dialogues just have to be cut or altered. Books and TV are just different mediums. You can't just adapt everything line by line from a book into a visual medium. If it was done this exact same way, we would eventually have a lot of scenes on the big screen that would be as entertaining as watching paint dry. You can't just adapt an internal monologue a character has in their mind as they're going to a place in a carriage or on horseback in complete silence. It's just them thinking inside their head. But this series' writers did not think about what to cut and what to change to keep loyal to the true story. That, in fact, wasn't their goal. Instead, their goal was writing the story the way they wanted to write it, while keeping some basic, very recognizable elements from the original story to eventually use them as props to pander to the already existing fanbase. What they produced was, in fact, fanfiction instead of a loyal adaptation. And they did this in a very arrogant way, claiming that this was, in fact, the real Witcher, when it was definitely not. Throughout the entire series, I almost felt like the showmakers were trying to convince the existing fanbase how witchery, how Witcher-esque this show was, which is a weird thing to claim on my part, and even a weirder thing for them to do. From the picture-perfect posters to the line-by-line replicas of the original source material, how can this not be a faithful adaptation, right? Because the show writers, in a way, knew that they didn't grasp what made the original source material unique and captivating. Instead, they tried to shove the general aesthetic and the themes popularly associated with this story, and turn the dial on these things from 2 to 100. Nowadays, kids really like gray morality, so we will make sure to give it to them. In fact, we will give it to them so hard that they will think this script was written by one of the scriptwriter's 13-year-old son in his skibbity toilet edgy Sigma phase. And here's a question. Can you tell me who this person is? Seriously, can you tell me who this character is supposed to be? Yennefer? So before anyone accuses me of anything, I'm not putting any blame on Anya Chalotra, who played Yennefer in the Netflix Witcher. I think she's a great actress who's obviously gorgeous. I'm not here to make some racist comment, unlike most people on Reddit who are unabashedly ready to make one. I'm here to talk about her character in the Netflix Witcher, because Netflix Yennefer is not Yennefer at all. The show went so hard in the direction of fanfiction-ification that even some iconic characters like Yennefer were completely unrecognizable. Yennefer, for my young Witcher virgin friends, is supposed to be what I can best describe as a cold as bitch. She is cold, calculating, and knows no limits to get what she wants, and she never apologizes for the extremes she goes to. But she also has a tender and loving side despite her coldness, with Geralt often feeling like a dog on a leash. In the second Witcher book, Sword of Destiny, there is an exact story titled A Shard of Ice, which is meant to be a metaphor for ice-like cold and emotionally distant Yennefer is, making Geralt feeling like her love is like a shard of ice. But Yennefer, despite her coldness, is also the softest with Ciri, who is like a daughter for her. She is clever, manipulative, and uses her wit often to express herself. And that is what I liked about her. The Netflix show attempts to make her likable and warm, completely watering down her character. It is true, and it is implied that Yennefer used to be a hunchback, or have some sort of deformation in her body in the books, but the way Yennefer's backstory is explored in the show just feels so out of character for her, whether you'd like to admit it or not. Psychopaths and sociopaths are extremely entertaining to watch or read about. I don't want the writers to water them down to make them relatable, because they shouldn't be. Their lack of empathy and their perfectionism and their unique ways is what defines them. Why would you try to make them like everybody else? In the books and the games, you can see Yennefer's power and influence. She's very decisive, and the fact that she often lies and the other characters can't figure it out unless she reveals it puts her in this position where you're not exactly sure whether you can trust her or not. She always has a bigger plan in mind, a bigger plan that most of the time the viewer and Geralt isn't aware of. So you get it, she's cold as fuck. But in the show, what we got was a Yennefer who acted like a 14-year-old, doing everything for the sake of rebelling with no bigger plan in mind. She was easily swayed by her emotions and had no control over anything. And despite this, she was always referred to having power and control. My girl had no power and no control over anything that was happening. And don't get me started on how she's supposed to be a mother figure for Ciri. Because the actors of Yennefer and Ciri are very close in age, or Anya Chalotra is just so beautiful and youthful, their interactions miss this mother sort of daughter chemistry that the show forcefully tries to implement. They often look like an awkward pair of sisters that were forced to sit together in a family road trip rather than a mother-daughter. Also, this mother sort of daughter dynamic does not exactly work when Yennefer is readily willing to sacrifice Ciri's life for any sort of reward. The one thing I understood from the books and the games was that even though Yennefer was strict and harsh with Ciri, especially while training her, she would never ever sacrifice her. She's actually quite overprotective of her. Like, guys, what? I cannot. Anyone who's read the original source material knows that this is
biggest piece of dog shit that I have ever heard.
Whose idea was it to make her do this? And then they resume their life as if nothing happened. Whose idea was that? So as with every adaptation, the adapters will have a certain vision of what the adaptation should be like. And of course this vision will be somewhat different from the source material. But the real game changer for a good adaptation seems to be embodying the core elements and the concepts of the original story, while also getting a lot of advice and supervision from the original creator or creators. Sometimes completely veering off the source material can even be better. A lot of people, including the New York Times best-selling fantasy author Brandon Sanderson, think that the success of the third Harry Potter movie, The Prisoner of Azkaban, compared to the first two, is because of its very derivation from the source material. Directed by Alfonso Cuarón, The Prisoner of Azkaban is often considered one of the most stylistically unique films in the franchise. Cuarón introduces a darker, more artistic approach to the story, and Rowling gave him creative freedom, trusting his vision. In fact, J.K. Rowling still played a great part in advising the director, as well as the screenplay writer Steve Kloves. Cuarón once mentioned in interviews that Rowling provided him with exclusive insights into the story's future developments and character beats. Surely, The Witcher's showrunners did the same thing. At Vienna Comic Con, Andrzej Sapkowski, the author of the Witcher series, chatted with Austrian gaming website Serial Killers about the Netflix Witcher TV series.
And when you visited Netflix on the set for the Witcher series, did you give them any feedback on the set? Did you like some?
Maybe I gave them some ideas, but they never listened. They never listened. But it's normal. It's normal. Who's this? There's a writer. There's nobody.
So while Sapkowski was announced as a creative consultant for the Netflix Witcher show, with all these fancy footage of the Witcher showrunner Laura Histrich and Sapkowski interviewing, his actual influence on the show appears minimal, like the constant pandering to the fan base that is abundant in the entire show. Nominating Sapkowski as a creative consultant was also for its namesake, and entirely performative, and it's not because the showrunners ever intended to take his advice. And I have a major issue with this on multiple fronts. First of all, how arrogant must you be to think that you can tell a better story than the original creator of the story? The levels of arrogance in this way of thinking, it's quite frankly bamboozling to me. And secondly, do you guys remember that time when the writers of The Witcher were so overworked that they were working such crazy hours to complete these unfinished scripts that they couldn't see their families on months on end? And I mean, that's horrible. I wouldn't wish that upon anyone. No one should work under such harsh conditions. But again, was it really necessary? These people literally had 8 books, 3 games, the original writer as a creative consultant, and endless amounts of Reddit forums and fan media and social media in general, where they should have been able to search what people like about the story, and they were struggling to finish the script? Huh? It feels so wasteful and counterintuitive. It's not like they were coming out with an entirely new story with an entire new world and entirely new magic systems. Just put the source material into screenplay format. Just have someone work with Sapkowski to put it into screenplay format. Like, I don't get how it's so hard and convoluted. And please stop pretending that you can tell a better story than the author, because you can't. And that's evident. It seems that the show's creators not only didn't take Sapkowski's advice, they purposefully went against it. A former writer for the series, Biu Demayo, revealed that some writers were not fans or actively disliked the books and games, even actively mocking the source material. So yeah, I really wonder why Henry Cavill left this project. Demographic collide. Here are the people responsible for adopting The Witcher and their previous history of the other shows they've worked with. I mean, Vampire Diaries? Oh, I don't say what the problem is, they're all fantasy shows. Actually, fantasy and paranormal are entirely different genres, even if they have commonalities. And the demographic of a show like The Vampire Diaries is massively different from the demographic of The Witcher. But what happens if we make The Witcher written for a demographic that would enjoy The Vampire Diaries? Well, we get whatever this show is supposed to be. A show presented as grimdark fantasy that is actually a paranormal soap opera. Sure, Vampire Diaries is massively popular, but within its own demographic. Young, impressionable middle school to teenager girls, the age I was when I watched this show religiously. While a lot of things in the Vampire Diaries is somewhat cliche or overused, it doesn't make this show less entertaining for the fanbase because this is what the demographic wants. The creators knew about what a middle school or teenage girl fantasizes about on a daily basis, and they made a show about it. But in contrast to this, the stark truth of how much the show writers didn't understand the demographic of The Witcher and what they want is obvious. No wonder Henry Cavill wanted to leave the show. This man wanted to star in the show The Witcher as Geralt of Rivia, only for 3 seasons to pass and for Henry to understand that he's playing a character entirely different in an entirely different show meant for an entirely different audience. Look, I think it is great that something that resonates with a certain demographic, and in this case the demographic of Discord mods, is chosen to be adapted for the masses. I'm not trying to gatekeep The Witcher for only the demographic of nerds and gamers. Honestly, I think that there are a lot of aspects from The Witcher games and the books that a general audience would enjoy, but there is no way that all of these writers, who quite frankly have never been involved in a fantasy show, would understand the mechanics of how to make this adaptation successful. Although I made this video for funsies and entertainment purposes, there was a part of my heart that broke when I watched this show. The Witcher has a special place in my heart. For those who've seen the Netflix Witcher and didn't know about it before, who just thought it was another mediocre fantasy show, might not understand why people are so mad. The most accurate comparison I can make here, comparing Witcher to any other media, would be to Shrek, funnily enough. Shrek, if we get past the memes, is a masterpiece of subversion. While the tones are very different, Witcher can also be considered a subversion of the epic fantasy genre, where the good guys don't necessarily always win, and we get to see the more realistic and uglier sides to things like war, power, and loss. Andrzej Sapkowski was known for taking popular fairy tale stories like Snow White or The Little Mermaid and turning them into their darkest versions, subverting every element that is usually abundant in a typical fairy tale. The character of Renfri is loosely inspired from the fairy tale character Snow White, as she used to be a princess that was doomed to die, and was now living with 7 short men. The twist was that she killed a man that was trying to rape and kill her, and for a while she lived on the streets and learned how to fight. I know that even more hardcore fans than I am will come at me in the comments and say things like, you know, the games are as much fanfiction as the show was. They're both massively different. And to that I say, yes, I know. But making something as close to the books as possible should not be the main goal of an adaptation. It's kind of like having this cake already baked and people are like, well, we really love this cake and this cake already has a massive amount of people that already love it and we want to take it and make it into a different form. We would like to know how it would be if it was sold as cupcakes. But the recipe, the ingredients, is already there. You just need to get some muffin tray, take care of the icing and decorating, things that require work and some level of creativity, yes, but there is absolutely no need to change the entire core of the cake. Just deciding that you know better than the chef and being like, well, I just felt like adding 2 eggs instead of 3 and using cocaine instead of powdered sugar is not going to make you bake better cupcakes. In this article that I found during my research for this video, best-selling author Brandon Sanderson talks about why in general fantasy adaptations in streaming usually fail, and gives examples of the Netflix Witcher as well as The Wheel of Time, originally a book series written by Robert Jordan that Sanderson helped complete, and where he was a supervisor for the Amazon Prime adaptation. And from the tone of this article, it seems like, similar to Sapkowski, Amazon Prime didn't listen to my man Brandon either. I was wondering for a while why I haven't seen any TV adaptations of any Brandon Sanderson's books, which are quite frankly insanely popular and very beloved, and I was surprised to find out that the answer is actually multiple streaming platforms and studios did offer Sanderson to adapt his works, but my man Brandon knows better. He was like, no, after what you've done to The Wheel of Time and The Witcher, you ain't gonna ruin my stories. Sanderson is looking for people who are as passionate about his work as he is, and he simply won't accept any cash grab adaptations. Can I just say, what a legend. I guess the reason why we see an influx of fantasy shows is this insane success and popularity of Game of Thrones. So now every streaming platform wants to get their very own Game of Thrones, with Prime adapting Wheel of Time and Disney adapting Percy Jackson, and of course Netflix adapting The Witcher. But I think it's sort of silly simply attributing the success of Game of Thrones to the genre of fantasy alone. And hey, I love fantasy. I mean, look at me, bro. Look at the types of videos I make. I spend way too much time thinking about this. The reason why Game of Thrones was so popular wasn't because it had dragons or any fantastical elements. The average person actually does not even give a flying fart about dragons, which says a lot about society. In my opinion, the reason why Game of Thrones was so successful is because of its insanely well-written character arcs, its subversion of epic fantasy tropes, and its unique story structure where a multitude of stories and characters are explored in parallel, sometimes meeting and sometimes never crossing with each other, with no clear main character. So my point here, I guess, is that narrative and characters come before anything else. You can't simply pander your way through an adaptation, trying to gaslight people into thinking that you're loyal to the original source material when you aren't. Because unlike the average American who you blame for being too dumb, actually a lot of people can see through bullshit. I mean, the last season of Game of Thrones should have hammered in that point. Why does Netflix always keep adapting these stories that are dear to my heart? Why won't you adapt something like Akatar or Fourth Wing? It's right there for the taking, guys. They're popular, they already have an existing fan base, and they will go quite nicely with the demographic of the Vampire Diaries. And there's nothing to ruin. Netflix, I swear to God, if you adapt Fourth Wing or Akatar, I'll be the first one to watch it. You don't need to worry about fans talking about timelines, about character arcs. Just do it and watch it print money.
So would you be interested in watching Witcher Season 4?
No. Netflix, it's done. You've lost. You've botched the countless times I've put my trust in you. Just please move on with Akatar or something else, because you've managed to give the ick to the already loyal fans of the Witcher series. No, I will not be watching the new Witcher anime, or anything else that you decide to churn out related to The Witcher. Instead, I will aggressively scroll past it whenever I see it on my Netflix feed. I'd rather complete a frying pan spick and span quest in Witcher 3 100,000 times and play hours of countless rounds of Gwent before you can ever convince me to consume any sort of Netflix Witcher related content.